Welcome to the Gigacast. I'm your host, Gav Blacksburg, here today with Omar Quasi, Sawyer Merritt, and Farzad Misbahi. And today we are talking about a $10 trillion topic. You know it, I know it, we all know that it's coming. The robots are here. What's happening next? Tesla, Optimus. It's a time of innovation. So excited to talk about this with this knowledgeable group. Let's get right into it. We learned a lot more about Optimus, it feels like, just in the last couple of weeks. We've seen videos, announcements, bold predictions. Let's talk about it. Farzad, kick us off with your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, it's interesting to see how quickly the story is revolving. And I'm actually really interested to pick y'all's brain on this. We saw the job postings, right? What was it, like 60-something positions, Sawyer? How many was it?
Yeah,
About 60-something. Okay, so is that an acceleration of the program? Is that how they were planning on going anyway? Like, I'm actually really curious to see what you guys are thinking about that, because the way I view it is, generally speaking, the market and the general population views this thing as total sci-fi. Like, it's there's no way we're going to have humanoid robots in 2025, right? That's the general sense I get. And yet it seems like between the guidance we got from Tesla at their earnings call just these last couple of weeks about 50,000 next year and whatever, $1 trillion by whatever crazy prediction that Elon had. So you have that, and then on top of that you have your Apptronics, you have your figures, you have all these Chinese makers. They are going super hardcore on this thing. It's obvious that there's a huge push towards this technology. And so do we think this is an acceleration of that, or do we think this is just like, hey, Tesla's been working on this forever? Like, what does this paint? I feel like this sets up Tesla so freaking well for the next couple of years from a human robot perspective.
This is probably quicker than most people expected. But I can't remember, Elon said on the Q4 earnings call, didn't he say that Tesla was going to build, I think, 1,000 this year or something, right?
Yeah. 5,000, I think it was?
I think it was a low thousands, roughly. But I think most people expected that to be at Giga Texas. So I think some people were surprised that this is actually going to be at Fremont. And team, if you could bring up that Cybertruck photo, I don't know if people remember this, but 2 years ago on Tesla's, I think it was a Q1 or Q2 earnings slide deck, they shared a photo of the Cybertruck pilot line actually at Fremont. And obviously we know the Cybertruck is not currently built at Fremont, but they did this essentially, work out the kinks and work out the issues before they begin mass production at Giga Texas. So I think that's what they're doing with Optimus now at Fremont. I think they're going to do the same thing. The engineering HQ is right next door over in Palo Alto, so that's super close by. And all the engineers that they probably want for this type of thing are all close by in the Bay Area in general anyways. So I think this is just them starting early, getting things. I think it's still going to take a while to get to like full mass production, but I think they're doing this at a good time. And they probably, they're probably going to have these job postings up for quite a while until probably through this end of the year. But I think it's bullish on the timeline.
Farzad, you looking to get back in there?
What, in Tesla? No, dude. I love what I do. I really
right
do.
In time for him to get replaced by a robot.
Hell yeah.
People were making that joke that like all these job postings are just for people that are going to get replaced by the Optimuses that they're building.
Well, I think what's interesting there though is like I really think I used to be on the sort of like the bandwagon. And this is shifting for me. I mean, it's the progress in AI has been so unbelievable. I really do think that there's going to be a big tension as this technology takes hold as way quicker than people thought. I think you're going to have, in my opinion, I think there's going to be a big time panic in the coming years from some people that are like, holy crap, I didn't expect there to be humanoid robots walking around in my factory. Holy crap, I didn't expect there to be humanoid robots walking around my warehouse, right? I think there's going to be a very, and completely understandably so, there's going to be like a rejection of the technology from a subset of the population, but it's also going to be very interesting to see what kind of industries this gives birth to, because there's so many things that now become possible. Like one of the things I was thinking about is like food delivery, anything where you're taking product from one point to another. With self-driving vehicles and the human-robot combination, the cost of moving stuff from one point to another becomes so much cheaper because you've removed human labor out of the loop. What kind of industry does that give birth to? Like what are the things that are not possible because moving stuff has become way cheaper, right? That's what's coming. And the company that's going to be able to provide that product and that service is going to win so big because now you've opened up TAMs that never existed before, you know?
Yeah, and I think Elon said that they were going to, in the second half of next year, right, that they were going to maybe partner with some companies and start putting it in other people's factories as well.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to see how this sort of affects employee morale for the jobs that will ultimately end up being replaced by those Optimus robots, especially at Tesla. Because if you know that ultimately your job is just going to be replaced by a robot, how does that make you feel as an employee? Maybe it's just you just accept it; it's the inevitable, or Tesla finds another job for you within the company. I don't know. But
yeah, it's like the framing of like replace versus enhance, right? I think that's the like in a factory job or a warehouse job. Like, again, I might be approaching this from like a legacy viewpoint, right? Because I come from that world of like distribution and logistics. And so like when I'm looking at it just purely from a business standpoint, I'm like, okay, do I want a human who 20% of the time is going to be excellent and predictable and is going to be go-getter, do their job, right? Am I going to try to hire that person who, I'd say, I don't know, $60, $70, $80,000 a year? Or am I going to hire a robot that's going to be that person 100% of the time, and it's going to cost a fraction than that human does, right? So like the equation completely breaks. So it becomes a discussion of like, okay, what are the jobs that actually make sense in a human or robot world versus ones that don't? And who are going to be the people that are going to be embracing that and moving that forward? It's going to require society to make those jobs, right? The economy is a function of what is it's the needs of humans. So when you have robots doing those things that we used to do, what happens now, right? What percentage of the population does agriculture now versus like 10,000 years ago? You know, at the dawn of the agricultural revolution and for the thousands of years, like 80-90% of the human population was just doing crops, right? Now, what percentage of human population does crops now? It's not like 90%. It's not like most people lost jobs. It's just we transformed the economy into something new. It's just hazy. It's hard to see what it looks like, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a little bit of a different perspective. You know, I see Optimus as really a continuation of an automation trend that has spanned centuries, right? I mean, you look back at even making machines to make clothing faster, or you think about an accountant who had to do a bunch of accounting manually. And when the computer came, well, did it really take that person's job? No, it just sort of helped them do it faster. It helped them do it with less errors. And generally, I think, made their lives easier. They're probably making more money. You know, in the case of Optimus, I think, you know, if there's a job that the robot can do right now, it's probably not something the human is really interested in. It's probably boring. It's probably repetitive. And if you think about a world where, you know, every worker has multiple sort of human assistants helping them out, or sorry, robot assistants helping them out, that's probably one where the jobs that are remaining are quite a bit more pleasant than the manual labor that's involved in that factory production today.
So you think it'll bring about more of a meaningful life maybe for the humans?
I mean, you know, I think there will probably be less humans working in the factory. But those who are there, they'll probably have a team of robots that can help them out. Instead of carrying something heavy or doing something physical, their job really becomes directing the robots, right? So you still need that know-how. What do the robots need to do? What are the common issues? What are the things to look for? But there will probably be far fewer humans. And the process will probably be, you know, higher quality. You know, you have less injuries, less stress. You know, factory jobs are dangerous. Sometimes people even die in car factories, right? You had that issue, you know, in one of the Ford factories recently. So robots could be helpful. You know, some of these jobs that are probably going to be the first jobs Optimus tackles in the Fremont factory. And I do think that's part of the reason. I agree with Sawyer that having it close to the engineers and testing is a big part of it. Tesla loves to have their engineers close to the manufacturing line. But also there's a ton of jobs in the Fremont factory that the robot could help with, I think. And those first jobs that they're going to tackle are probably the worst jobs in the factory. taking a piece of metal, moving it 10,000 times, stuff that no human is saying, please, save this job. I really love moving this piece of metal.
So, but here's I will take a slightly different approach there, because I think all of us, most people will say objectively that like that piece of moving, that job of moving piece from point A to point B sucks for sure. But how many people, like if you use the United States as an example, how many people depend on that job to make sure they can pay rent? Right? How many people depend on that job to make sure that they can pay something? That's where I'm like, if I'm thinking about it realistically, like I've worked in warehouse environments, I know what the makeup of the labor force looks like, right? If there is a situation where the human or robot legitimately displaces human labor because it makes no sense to hire a human to do that job, by default, you're going to lose a certain... Humans will not be needed for those jobs anyway. There's going to be a transitionary period. What happens in that transitionary period? Those people that will be offset in those industries are usually of the lower rung of the economic ladder. So now you're basically saying, hey, I know you're already having a tough time meeting ends meet, and you're having a tough time paying for rent and paying for whatever, for food. Oh, by the way, this robot can do it better than you and cheaper. So do we have an economy that's going to be able to, is that person going to be able to take advantage of the economy in that world immediately, right? That's where I struggle really deeply, because I don't know if the economy is set up to be able to absorb that person in another role in that type of financial situation. I could be looking at it completely wrong, but I almost lose sleep about that, because I think that could cause, like, as great as the end state of automation looks like, that transitionary period to me still feels really hazy. And those very difficult conversations are going to be had, in my opinion. And one of the things that I'm very thankful of, at least that's starting to happen from my perspective, is that now we're having conversations around, hey, are we sure we have a government that's responsive enough to the will of the people to make sure that we can absorb things like this, right? That's like the whole Doge stuff that's starting to move a little bit from that perspective. But
I think Omar's right in that we're good at adapting, right? I kind of agree with you, though, that in that sort of in between period, the transition period, where maybe we haven't quite adapted yet, those people might kind of be screwed a little bit temporarily. But I think ultimately we'll find some sort of job, some sort of income, some sort of purpose for those people, something to do with their lives other than just like what Elon says.
Like, where's your idea go? Because McDonald's is like the classic joke, but like, why would McDonald's seriously hire people over the robot that's never going to give attitude, right? It can work all day. It doesn't have to take shifts. So I'm like, I hear both sides as well. And I want to flip this back to you in a second, Zora, but one side, no brainer, right? Society moves forward. We can build better than ever before. We have a stronger workforce. It's great. Other side, very dystopian, like you're saying, Farzad. There is this massive portion of people, right, that is what's happening with them. And I honestly have no clue. Sawyer, I hear what you're saying, like, oh, it's like, maybe you're out of luck, we'll find a job. But I'm like, when you theorize, like, what is that job?
I remember when everyone was worried that the renewable energy industry would put out a lot of coal workers out of jobs permanently because there's no maintenance or anything you need to do. But it turns out actually you can create quite a few jobs in the green economy. So I'd be lying if I said I knew exactly what kind of jobs these people that are going to be replaced by Optimus robots or humanoid robots would ultimately have. But I think we'll just find something for them. I know Elon says the AI and like humanoid robots are a part of this. We'll bring an age of abundance, and we might sort of have a crisis of meaning, right? What's the point of life? What are we doing every day with our lives if everything's just automated? But I don't know. I just kind of believe in the human existence and our ability to adapt.
Yeah, I mean, I think really there is obviously going to be some displacement. If you have this new machine that's a universal machine that can do so many tasks a human can do, there will be disruption. I mean, I think that's inevitable. But I really see it as a progression of machines that over time have allowed us to automate more and more. And rarely have you seen a generation that does the same jobs as their forefathers. Back to pre-agricultural times, pretty much everybody in the tribe was responsible for hunting and gathering. Everybody was responsible for getting food to feed themselves and feed others, right? And over time, we developed machinery, we developed agricultural machinery. Now you can say, quote unquote, those jobs were lost because people aren't doing agriculture anymore. you don't have machines that can produce a lot of food for everybody. But people went and became poets. They made movies. They did gardening, all kinds of other stuff that we couldn't have thought of. If you think about the agricultural or the industrial revolution, where people used to make clothing, they sewed it by hand, then it became automated. People probably couldn't have imagined computer programmers or prompt engineers or high frequency traders or so many of these other jobs that exist
YouTubers.
now. Right. And we probably can't imagine what those jobs look like either. I mean, maybe the last job is kind of investor. But this isn't, I don't really see this as dystopian where, now we can make a lot more clothes with machines. We can make a lot more food with machines. I see it as actually utopian. On one hand, you have these auto workers who are getting laid off, and hey, you don't need to pay their salary. You don't need to pay health care. You don't need to give them stock options. There's a tremendous cost savings there. This allows us to then move into a world where maybe a Model Y that costs $50,000 today costs $25,000 or $30,000. And far more people are able to access far more goods and services. So there is kind of the flip side of it as well.
For
and
sure.
Probably have like servicing jobs to service the robots themselves or people in the actual factory. They still have some of that.
Yeah. But, I think the one model that I used to think about the transition, though, and just to pull in that thread a little bit what you just said too, like food's also going to get cheaper, medicine's also going to get cheaper, right? There's going to be a lot of things that get cheaper that are going to sort of fulfill the most basic needs of humanity for sure. But like the transitionary period to me is the one that even though the end state, I'm with I think the entire panel where the end state will be a positive. The transitionary period reminds me of like when the United States had all the manufacturing base, people were working like crazy, and then the United States said, "Hey, there are other people in the world, like let's call these like other robots in the world that can do the same job for way cheaper, and they can just sell us the stuff, right? They can just send it to us, right? So let's move all the manufacturing base to Mexico, China, so on and so forth." What did that do? That left the entire middle of the country. You went from having thriving economies to literally just despair everywhere. And the despair existed because the economy was not able to serve the people in those regions. There were not enough jobs. There were not enough things for those people to do outside of them rooting up and trying to go somewhere else, which a lot of them didn't do, right? So that's kind of what sticks to my mind. It's basically the same exact thing. It's like instead of like moving the jobs from the United States to China, you're just moving the jobs from the human to the robot. And so like what do we have in place to be able to absorb that, especially when human or robots are going to be able to ramp at a million times faster rates than a human can? A human is limited by having sex. A robot's limited by how many materials you can push through a factory, right? So like the shock, like that's the shock to the system of how quickly you can dump these things on the public to make things way, way cheaper and way, way more affordable. I don't know. Like, are we talking enough about that as a society? Are we talking enough about that as a country? Are we talking enough about that? Right? I don't know. I could
really
be,
I like his spin that this is utopian, not dystopian. That's going to be the back and forth. I feel like there's a couple of topics that go into it as well with how hard is it going to be to get to scale, right? And how complex are these products? There was an interesting quote from Elon that talked about the training compute needed for Optimus is 10 times what the car needs. And we know that the car is already taking a lot of compute, right? We've seen the buildings and the photos of these data centers. So it seems like there's a lot that still has to get done here. And so when you compare that with, Elon's quote, which he said, the normal internal plan calls for roughly 10,000 Optimus robots to be built this year. Will we succeed in building 10,000 by the end of the year? Probably not, but we will succeed in making several thousand. So several thousand by the end of this year. I can only imagine next year what they're looking at. Really high levels of compute. He talked about the complexity of just the hand, let alone the brain. So I really would love to hear your guys' thoughts on how feasible the timeline is here. Is this something like FSD where there's, V1, but then to get to V13, right, where really it seems like that's where you guys saw the inflection point. There's just a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah, I think regardless, we should take any Elon timeline with a grain of salt, especially since Optimus is so different from a car. It's there's so many small, advanced, unique parts that you can't just share across platforms with their cars, right? Of course, there's the cells and the batteries, and they share, and the cameras and the AI and stuff. But by and large, yeah, it's going to be interesting because no one's ever really ramped up something like this at scale before. But I do believe in the team's ability to iterate quickly and to, fix any issues on the production line quite quickly and to be able to adapt. So I'm not expecting, a few thousand units this year, but I hope I'm wrong because that would be incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're producing maybe dozens right now in a mostly manual line. But this is classic Elon, right? When he unveiled the Optimus, he said something like, "And we're going to start production next year," or something like that. And of course, they didn't actually start production a year later. But he loves tight deadlines, and I think he said it really well on the call. We'll set the goal at 10,000. We probably won't make 10,000 this year, but hey, if we make a few thousand, that's a few thousand humanoid robots, and then we're ready to scale up from there. So, I mean, this is really a case where the AI models they've trained, that real world AI that knows how to move around the world on its own safely. And it's just insane when I use FSD, how smoothly and perfectly it's doing every drive now. It's raining here in LA, doesn't make a difference. They really have trained some of the best models in the world for this. And I think it's such a classic pivot where you're taking what you really know how to do well as a company, in their case, FSD, and pivoting into a product category that I think can be bigger than the entire auto business. So this is really what matters long term. It'll probably be a while before it's material, 6 quarters, 8 quarters. And in the meantime, people are going to be looking at the auto business, which frankly doesn't look to be doing too much better than 2024. But long term, if they are actually able to get this out into the market, I mean, you see companies like OpenAI, companies like Boston Dynamics, there seems to be widespread consensus, not just among Elon, but among the industry, that this is $1 trillion market that's forming here in humanoid robotics.
Yeah.
Well, I trillion.
10 trillion, right? Yeah. I view the sort of the ramp in a very similar way. Like the hockey stick will happen at some point, right? Who cares if it's 2028, 2030, 2032, 2035? There's no other company, it seems, that's as well equipped as Tesla to be able to have that hockey stick moment with humanoid robots. They have the entire vertical. Like they understand manufacturing better than anybody else on the planet. They understand real world AI better than anyone else on the planet, right? They have an entire ecosystem with the app and everything where they know how to serve this to the public better than anybody. It just happened to have everything in one place, right? And even if you look at it from a compute perspective, and I'd love to hear your take on this, Omar, because you're the I think the most technically savvy out of all of us. I could be wrong, but even the 10x compute comment where Elon's like, "Yo, we need 10x more compute to sort of replicate what the bot's going to do, similar to the car in its domain," right? So the car is becoming extremely good at driving. So the bot, to be an extremely good bot, is going to require 10 times the compute. Even there, like, what are the advancements going to be like in compute in the next 5-10 years? What are the advancements going to be like from like the architecture and we saw the breakthrough with DeepSeek, right? With like inference stuff. Like, okay, cool. Tesla's probably going to experience the same exact thing. Like this space keeps revolving. So in 2025, it could be a 10x compute need, but in 2028, it could be, oh no, we got what we need. We just need more data or whatever, right? So I'd be curious to hear your take on that. Like, do you think I'm barking up the right tree?
Yeah, I mean, I think Elon's probably right. Training it probably is 10 times more complex. You probably need 10 times the compute, but luckily, NVIDIA keeps putting out new chips, and they put out a chip and they go, this one's 4 times faster than the old one in certain tasks, and we're going to sell it to you for the same price. And, software keeps improving. Generally, the cost of training and inference is going down consistently over time, and that's going to continue. But I do think some people kind of underestimate the difficulty and the complexity, to Elon's point of it being sort of 10 times more complex. Sometimes you hear this argument that, well, robots are going to be much easier than self-driving cars because self-driving cars, it could crash, it could kill you. The robot, it doesn't have that issue. But in fact, roads are pretty simple for AI comparatively. You've got lines. You need to stay in the line. Everything's very well marked. There's maps. When you go to a robot and they go inside, there are no maps. So they're learning to navigate a much wider variety of spaces freely. So you can see why that would need a lot more compute. They're not just moving forward, backward, side to side. They're moving, dozens or hundreds of different motors inside the robot to execute these tasks. And there is actually a safety component too, right? You don't want this robot kicking you or knocking something over, breaking your window, maybe even lighting your house on fire, keeping the stove on. So the intelligence capability this thing is going to need to really be a consumer product is going to be at a level we've never seen from AI before. I mean, we're talking about practically human level intelligence, AGI, that has to actually not run in a data center like OpenAI, but actually just run on the robot itself using Tesla's inference chips.
Yeah, speaking of those chips, NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, this was back on January 7th, exactly a month ago, talked about Elon and his attitudes toward these, talking about he's working on some of the most important areas, talked about XAI, Tesla, autonomous vehicles, and Optimus for humanoid robotics. Really thinks he's thinking that he's working on all exactly the right things. And so you're talking about they need the chips, they seem to have the supplier. And maybe that's one of the most important things that Elon has done is build the right relationships to acquire the materials necessary to build that vision, right? I think it's pretty hard if you don't have the relationships that he does.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to just add was, so Tesla now has a record $36 billion in cash. And some Tesla investors say, well, why is it growing? Let's do a stock buyback or something and help the stock. But if Elon is right in that you're going to need 10 times the compute to train Optimus, I mean, right now the Cortex GPU cluster at Gigacast is 100,000 GPUs, and I think that was $3 to $4 billion probably. So if you 10x that, you're looking at $30-40 billion potentially. Now Elon said they wouldn't obviously spend it in 1 year; it would be over, a few years or so. But you're going to need a lot of cash to be able to train these things if he's right about the 10x compute needs. So that's something that not a lot of companies can compete with. So that's an advantage for Tesla.
Yeah, I'll tell you guys as an investor and somebody that hasn't had as close relationship with the company, it's very difficult, I think, for people to evaluate what the true potential of the stock is here. And right now, Omar hit it on the head. People are still looking at the automotive business, right? That's the comps. They're not even comparing it on the AI side and FSD side, let alone Optimus is definitely not being included within that. From my end, when I look at companies, I try to run a discounted cash flow model. I try to understand what is their cash flow going to look like in 5 years, in 10 years. I'll be honest, guys, it's almost impossible to run that on Tesla right now. I have no clue. They could still be pouring money in and training these things. They could run and say, hey, we have a 5-year span where we just have to go negative free cash flow because we just need to get everything back into the company. It's really difficult to actually evaluate what that's going to look like. But I do believe, like you said, Farzad, there's going to be an inflection point and that hockey stick moment at some point. I'm just not sure when that is.
I think that's such great commentary, because it's like, if you view it from the perspective of just the technological breakthrough, what does it mean to solve self-driving at scale, at a scale where you can pump millions of units of road taxis per year on the road and you own the entire vertical? You own transportation at that point, right? It's like, it becomes like a weird situation where Tesla's so far ahead of everybody from a technology perspective, the AI perspective, the real world AI perspective, the manufacturing capacity perspective, the ecosystem. Like, who is second place? Second place feels, Elon has used a quote, like, famously, like, we want to be so far ahead you can't see second place. Like, that's what he said, but then analyze the industry and that's exactly what's happening. Okay, so that feels like you're going to be a multi-trillion-dollar company just on that. And then you layer on top of that, hey, this technology is also going to work with humanoid robots. And we have the same exact quote unquote moat. We have the best real world AI. We have the best manufacturing process. We understand the technology better than anybody in this domain. Okay, same thing. So first place, second place is so far behind us. But now you're in a market that's multi-deca-trillion big, right? You're talking about just labor, and you're limited by how many robots you can make. Like, this is why Tesla's so insane. It's because if they don't succeed, it's like they're just burning tens of billions of dollars in capex for no reason. But if they do succeed, they own labor and transportation. How do you value that? Like, if you value that with the assumption that they execute and they get that done, you sound like an idiot, like a complete lunatic, because you have these insane numbers, but you're just doing the math, right? And the other side, it's like, well, if they don't execute on that, what's the point? They're just basically Ford, you know? And that's why Gordon Johnson exists, because it's like, they're not going to execute on that. That's just a pipe dream, right? So from that perspective, I get it. Like, that's how you're valuing it. But then you're also like not giving Tesla the credit for the very obvious improvements they're making in this domain and this technology, right? So it's like the traditional sense of valuing Tesla it doesn't work with Tesla, because they are in a novel, like very one of one unique situation versus everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a super unique company, and that's why I'm loving these weekly conversations. And hopefully for the audience, we obviously are talking a lot of Tesla here, but there's so much more depth to it, right? There's Optimus. There's going to be other products that are going to continue to come out from Tesla as well that are going to blow your mind in some way, shape, or form. And the industry as a whole, right? We'd love to see competition, to be honest. I know that Elon says we want to be so far ahead, but competition breeds excellence, right? And so I wouldn't even be opposed to see other people trying to build in this space, trying to find unique ways to innovate, and just push forward the best, whatever that is. So that's really an amazing conversation on here, guys. Want to just go around, see if you guys had any final thoughts on this topic. I know we're going to have more conversations around Optimus as they release more details, and we just have a better understanding of what this truly is, what it's capable of, and when it's coming. Omar, I love the utopian approach that you took to it. I thought that was a really interesting kind of counterpoint to what me and Farzad were hitting on there. Any other thoughts on the Optimus combo?
Look, I mean, I don't think Elon and the Tesla team would be working on this if they thought it was going to be dystopian and just ruin the world. I think this is something that is going to be really important to that sort of utopian vision of abundance that Elon is talking about. There's a reason you see these robots in sci-fi and everything, why people have been dreaming about them for a long time, because, the economy is essentially about economizing labor and other resources. And, to kind of open that box up, I see this moment as really like the birth of the personal computer. If you go back to 1980 and you kind of, see people getting excited about the personal computer, and it was a nerdy thing at first. Most people didn't get it. And then, the cost was really high. It came down over time. Now, there's computers in every home. But people, like I saw an old interview with Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, and they said, do you really think that one day there will be a computer in every home? Which sounds like such a ridiculous statement now. I think we're really at the same place with robotics. Computers were such a general purpose device that let you accelerate the productivity of so many different fields. And the humanoid robot, which is something we've kind of been dreaming of for a while. What is a humanoid robot? It's essentially a computer with a body, a computer that can move around. This takes all the innovations we've seen in the personal computer space over the last decades, and for the first time applies it to tasks that are in the physical world. And it's going to be a very different economy than what we recognize. There, everyone and their mom is doing a robot now. You even saw Apple release a paper about some of their efforts in humanoid robotics. So, I think you're going to see Apple, OpenAI, Unitree, Boston Dynamics, Figure, everybody really compete in this space, just like in the early days of the personal computer. But in venture investing, when you don't really know what the future cash flows of the company are going to be for sure, what they really look at is the team. And you look at the team here, they've demonstrated that they know how to train these models. You have hundreds of thousands of people running stupid Apple reactions.
Shout out Apple.
You have hundreds of thousands of people who are using the self-driving software. You have a guy who catches rockets from space and the engineering team he's hired. And I think there's a good reason to believe in this team, which is their track record. You look at FSD, and with their manufacturing expertise and their AI expertise, I mean, this is one of the founders of OpenAI we're talking about here, or actually two of the founders. Karpathy helped, really start the Tesla AI team. With their manufacturing and AI prowess, there's a strong reason to believe that I think they're going to dominate humanoid robotics.
Yeah, I think, when the iPhone came out, I think most people were blown away by the technology, but I'm not sure most people understood how it would change the world. And the iPhone has now become the most successful consumer product in history. It's generated, I believe, 1.6 trillion in lifetime revenue, which is pretty nuts to think about. In just like less than 20 years, mind you. I think Optimus is going to be the same. I think it's just one of those technologies that not a lot of people understand yet, but it's going to change the world in so many ways that most people don't understand. And it would be my guess, if the vision plays out like a lot of us Uber bulls think it will, it'll probably be the most successful consumer product in history and overtake the iPhone. That's a huge prediction, but I think it's possible. The Optimus has so many ways to interact with our lives and make our lives better that I think it will be a huge net positive for humanity. And I can't wait to see how this thing unfolds.
Yeah, I think it's like that statement of like it's going to be the most successful consumer product ever. It's like, how can it not be? How can it not be? It's and like the thing too, and this might put us in a rabbit hole, so I'll keep it very brief so we can end this podcast at some point. The regulatory framework around the human or robot, if you think about like drawing a parallel to the car, it's very different, right? Because with a car, you're driving a missile on the road that you could literally kill tens of people if you just do the wrong thing, or if you do it on purpose, right? That's why we have driver's license. That's why we have these imaginary boundaries on the road by painting lines. It's like people literally drive towards each other at 65 miles an hour each way, and the only thing separating them is a line on the road. Just think about that for a second. Every time I drive, especially now that I have
that sometimes, I'm like, ooh, that's weird to think about.
What are we doing?
Scares me.
What are we doing? Ever since like I became a father and I have my kid in the back, I'm like, I drive completely differently now. I use FSD a lot more. Like even before, I was using it literally in as many places as I can. Now I go out of my way to use it everywhere because I'm like, holy shit, like anyone can do something.
And you're trusting that the person in the opposite lane isn't going to do anything crazy. It's like every person who passes, you're like, you just have to trust them that they're not going to swerve in your lane. Yeah.
It's insane. Yeah, we've all just made us, and that, honestly, this might be a weird take, but like this is why I have so much faith in humanity, because I'm surprised more people don't die every day. Like if humanity didn't really care about each other or like ourselves and like as a group, we'd be having way more car accidents. Like people would just be dying left and right. You know what I'm saying? So anyway,
we do have an issue there, though. I think it's the second leading cause of death in the U.S. after
no, I don't think so.
112 deaths per day in the U.S. from car.
Yeah,
from car accidents. Yeah, it's
34,000 a year.
Yeah,
it's definitely a lot. I think heart disease and cancer and all those things are by far the top one. Yeah. But it's a big number. It's like 35 to 40,000 people per year. Like it's an insane number. So the point I'm trying to make is, that has a very tight, very important regulatory framework because it's a very dangerous thing that we do. But with human or robots, like, are we really as afraid? Like, okay, if you have it in a home setting and it falls on your child, that's insane. Like, that's not a good thing that can happen. But in work settings, and you can confine it to its own space, you can manufacture and you can design the factory or the warehouse space to be around machinery. We already have forklifts, we have things like that. It's like, okay, wow, you can put a lot of human or robots in the world very, very quickly, and you don't have to navigate through the same regulatory hurdles that you have to do with a car. You just have to abide to OSHA and, it's like maybe some new things that the Trump administration will put forth. So very different landscape, and it allows for the adoption and the ramp to be significantly faster than the car.
Yeah. I think that can be part as well of our next conversation, which we can really do in Optimus Part 2, is the what if situation, right? Like, where does this end up going? What if we do hit some type of AGI? You mentioned robots are always in movies, Omar. Well, there's some movies where the robots aren't such good individuals in those movies, right? And it leads to, I think there's a lot of fear, right, that people still have. Like, I don't know if people are like ready to, even though, yes, they get into the car and they drive places, to have something in their home. You make a good point with the child, Farzad. So there's a lot more to dig into here that I think people just have a lot of questions, right? they have concerns and they want to understand how can they assuage those concerns. And same thing that they even had with the iPhone, right? Oh, my privacy and details like this. And ultimately, I think what's going to happen is there are going to be some fears and concerns, and the benefits are going to outweigh them. And that's what people are going to accept. Just like with every great piece of technology, right? There's always typically been some type of downside, and the benefit has outweighed it. Farza, just one last question for you. What do you plan on naming your first robot?
I haven't thought about it as much as I should have. What was yours, Sora?
Debbie.
Debbie.
No, okay.
That's a good question. I don't know.
I'm naming mine Gigacast. He's going to be incredible. Yeah.
Are you going to put a Gigacast logo on it so you can?
He's going to slap right onto the chest.
Claiming that as an expense.
It's going to be work write-off. Yes, that's actually correct. That's how I'm writing it off. He's going to be the producer for the pod.
We tend to give our animals human names. I wonder if people will give their Optimuses human names. That'll be.
I like naming things after food, like animals and stuff like that. I like naming them after food. Had my dog Cookie for years. So I don't know. We'll see. I think it'll be super fun. But anyways, this was really, to be honest, enlightening discussion, even for myself. I hope some of the others had great takeaways from it. We're going to have to do some type of part 2. There are so many other pieces that we just couldn't get to in one sitting. So we're going to continue to dive into it. Of course, there's so much more to talk about in the entire Tesla spectrum as well. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe wherever you're watching this. If you're watching this on Farzad's channel, of course, now you're probably more familiar with the Gigacast and who this crew is, but make sure that you're liking, following, and subscribing on his channel. If you're seeing this on X, check out our main channel. We hit 10,000 followers in 1 week, so clearly there's a lot of love for what's going on here. Thank you to my amazing speakers across the board on the panel. Thank you to our editor, David Carbutt. Thank you to the operations team, Samuel, Charles, and Evan, and everyone else who tuned in and watched this. We appreciate you. Looking forward to the next one. Have a great rest of your day.